David Williams had been through hell and back. 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart earned the hard way when he threw himself on a grenade to save his squad, losing his right leg in the process, but saving 6 lives. Now at 34 years old, he was finally heading home to see his daughter graduate from college, something he'd missed too many times because of his military service. But as he approached the TSA checkpoint at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the security supervisor took one look at his military ID and his race and made an assumption that would change everything. "You don't look like military to me," the supervisor announced loud enough for half the terminal to hear. "This ID is probably fake. We see this stolen valor stuff all the time." The insult hit David harder than any ID ever had. But what the supervisor didn't realize was that 6 men in civilian clothes had just witnessed the entire exchange. And they weren't tourists or businessmen. They were Navy SEALs, and they were about to teach him what real military brotherhood looked like. The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport as travelers hurried past gate after gate, dragging rolling suitcases and clutching coffee cups. Terminal D was particularly busy that Tuesday morning, with flights departing for destinations across the country. Among the crowd, Master Sergeant David Williams moved with the measured gait of someone who had learned to walk again after losing everything that mattered to him on a dusty road in Afghanistan. At 34, David carried himself with the quiet dignity of a soldier who had served his country with honor, even though the prosthetic leg hidden beneath his jeans was a constant reminder of the price he'd paid. His military duffel bag was slung over his shoulder, and his Purple Heart citation was folded carefully in his wallet, along with the commendation letters from the 6 soldiers whose lives he'd saved when he threw himself on that grenade. Today was different, though. Today he was traveling home to Memphis for the first time since his medical retirement, and he was nervous. Not about flying. He'd flown on military transports through combat zones, but about how people would see him now. Would they still see the hero who'd saved his unit, or would they see something else entirely? As he approached the TSA checkpoint, David felt the familiar weight of assumption that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He'd hoped that his military ID would at least guarantee him the basic respect every veteran deserved, but the expression on the security supervisor's face suggested otherwise. The supervisor, a man in his 50s named Gary Patterson, had been working airport security for 12 years. He'd seen it all, or at least he thought he had. Patterson had developed what he considered a keen eye for troublemakers, and something about the young black man approaching his checkpoint triggered all his internal alarm. "Next," Patterson called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who enjoyed the power his position gave him. David stepped forward, pulling out his military ID with practiced efficiency. "Good morning, sir. I'm active duty military. Well, recently retired, actually. Could I use the military priority lane?" Patterson took the ID card, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. He looked at the photograph, then at David's face, then back at the photograph. His expression grew more skeptical by the second. "You don't look like military to me," Patterson announced, loud enough for everyone in the security line to hear. The words carried across the terminal like a challenge, causing heads to turn and conversations to pause. David felt his stomach drop. He'd faced this kind of skepticism before, but never so publicly, never so aggressively. "Sir, that's my official military ID. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne Division." Patterson held up the ID card like it was a piece of evidence in a criminal trial. "This ID looks questionable to me. Matter of fact, I think it's fake. We see this stolen valor stuff all the time, people trying to get special treatment by pretending to be veterans." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. David felt every eye in the terminal turn toward him, and he could practically hear the whispers starting. A few people pulled out their phones, and he realized that within minutes, this humiliation would be captured on video and shared across social media. "Sir, I can assure you that ID is legitimate," David said, his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. "I earned my rank and my medals through 3 combat deployments. I lost my leg saving my unit from an IED explosion in Kandahar province." Patterson's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Oh, So now you're a wounded warrior too? Let me guess. You've got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, right? You people always have the same story. The words hit David like a physical blow. In 3 sentences, Patterson had dismissed his service, questioned his integrity, and reduced him to a stereotype. David had faced enemy fire without flinching, but this moment of public humiliation cut deeper than any battlefield wound. I do have a Purple Heart, David said quietly, and 2 Bronze Stars. But more importantly, I have 6 brothers who are alive today because of what I did. Patterson rolled his eyes. Right. And I'm sure you have all the documentation to prove it, don't you? Probably printed it off the internet last night. What Patterson didn't know was that 6 men standing in the civilian security line had been watching the entire exchange with growing anger. They weren't tourists or businessmen. Despite their casual clothes and unremarkable appearance, they were Navy SEALs, members of SEAL Team 6, returning from a classified mission that had taken them to the other side of the world. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Johnson was the first to notice the confrontation. At 29, he'd completed 4 deployments with the SEALs and had earned his own collection of medals, including a Silver Star for actions he couldn't discuss with anyone outside his team. He recognized the look in David's eyes, the same look he'd seen in the mirror after his own encounters with people who couldn't believe a black man could be an elite warrior. "You seeing this?" Marcus whispered to his teammate, Chief Petty Officer Carlos Rodriguez, who was standing next to him in line. Rodriguez, a 12-year veteran of the SEALs, nodded grimly. That's a real veteran getting disrespected by some rent-a-cop who's never served a day in his life. The third member of their team, Petty Officer Second Class James Wilson, had been recording training videos on his phone when the confrontation started. Without thinking, he switched to camera mode and began documenting what was happening. As a black SEAL from Detroit, he'd faced similar skepticism about his military service, and he knew how important it was to capture this moment. The other 3 SEALs, Petty Officer First Class David Kim, Petty Officer Second Class Michael Thompson, and Petty Officer Third Class Robert Davis, had all turned their attention to the security checkpoint. They were a diverse group, representing different backgrounds and ethnicities, but they shared a common bond forged in the crucible of combat and elite military training. "This is bullshit," Davis whispered, his jaw tightening as he watched Patterson continue to humiliate David. "That's a real hero getting treated like garbage." Chief Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. "We're not letting this slide. That man served his country with honor, and he deserves our respect." Meanwhile, at the security checkpoint, Patterson was escalating the situation. "I'm going to need you to step aside," he announced to David. "I'm calling my supervisor to take a look at this fake ID." David felt his face burn with embarrassment as hundreds of travelers watched him being singled out and humiliated. A few people were openly recording with their phones now, and he could imagine the headlines: "Veteran accused of stolen valor at airport." "Sir, I understand you're doing your job," David said, his voice still calm despite the storm of emotions inside him. "But I'm telling you the truth. I served my country with honor, and I earned every medal and commendation I received." Patterson's response was swift and cruel. "Save it for someone who believes you, pal. Real veterans don't have to prove themselves by making up stories about saving their buddies." That's when Chief Rodriguez stepped out of line. At 35, Carlos Rodriguez was a compact, muscular man who moved with the fluid grace of someone who had been trained to kill with his bare hands. He'd been a SEAL for 12 years, served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and a dozen other places that didn't officially exist on any mission reports. His chest was covered with ribbons and medals, but more importantly, he carried the quiet confidence of someone who had earned his place among America's most elite warriors. "Excuse me," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." Patterson looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Sir, please return to your place in line. This doesn't concern you." Rodriguez smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Actually, it does concern me. You see, I'm active-duty military, and so are my 5 teammates over there. We've been watching you disrespect a fellow veteran for the past 10 minutes, and we're not going to stand for it." As if on cue, the other 5 SEALs stepped out of line and formed a semicircle around the security checkpoint. They didn't say anything, didn't make any threatening gestures, but their presence was unmistakable. These weren't ordinary travelers. They moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit. Patterson's confidence began to waver. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm Chief Petty Officer Carlos Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs." Rodriguez interrupted, pulling out his military ID. "These are my teammates. We've just returned from a classified mission overseas, and we're traveling home to see our families. Just like this man here." He gestured toward David, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. In 12 years of military service, he'd never seen anything like this. Marcus Johnson stepped forward, his own military ID in hand. "Petty Officer First Class Marcus Johnson, SEAL Team 6. I'd like to take a look at this man's ID that you claim is fake." Patterson found himself surrounded by 6 of the most dangerous men in the American military, and his bravado began to crumble. "Now wait just a minute." "No, you wait," Rodriguez said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more intimidating than any shout. "This man told you he served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He told you he lost his leg saving his unit. He told you he earned a Purple Heart and 2 Bronze Stars, and instead of thanking him for his service, you accused him of stolen valor." James Wilson stepped forward, his phone still recording. "What's your name, sir? I want to make sure I spell it correctly when I post this video." Patterson's face went pale. "You can't record me without my permission." "Actually, I can," Wilson replied calmly. "We're in a public place, and you're a public employee. More importantly, you're publicly humiliating a veteran who deserves better." By now, the confrontation had drawn a crowd. Other travelers were gathering around the security checkpoint, many of them recording with their phone. The atmosphere in the terminal had shifted from the usual rushed indifference to something more electric and dangerous. But the SEALs weren't done yet. This was about more than just one moment of disrespect. It was about the systematic mistreatment of veterans, particularly veterans of color, who faced skepticism and discrimination despite their service to their country. Rodriguez turned to David, his expression softened. "Brother, what's your name and unit?" "Master Sergeant David Williams, 82nd Airborne Division," David replied, his voice stronger now. "When were you in Afghanistan?" 3 tours between 2015 and 20. "Lost my leg in Kandahar province when my unit hit an IE. Threw myself on a grenade to save my squad." Rodriguez nodded, recognizing the quiet way David described his heroism. Real veterans didn't brag about their actions, they simply stated the facts, and let others draw their own conclusions. "How many lives did you save?" Rodriguez asked. 6, David replied. "My entire squad." Rodriguez turned back to Patterson, who was now visibly sweating. "This man saved 6 American lives. He gave his leg for his country, and you accused him of stolen valor." Michael Thompson, the youngest of the SEALs, stepped forward. "Sir, I'm curious, what's your military background? Which unit did you serve with?" Patterson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I never served, but that doesn't mean." "So you never served," Thompson interrupted. "You never put on the uniform, you never deployed overseas, you never faced enemy fire, but you feel qualified to judge this man's service." The crowd around the checkpoint had grown larger, and the mood was shifting decidedly against Patterson. Someone in the crowd called out, "Thank you for your service," directed at both David and the SEALs. Robert Davis pulled out his phone and began scrolling through something. "Master Sergeant David Williams, 82nd Airborne, here it is. Silver Star recommendation that was upgraded to Bronze Star. Purple Heart for wounds received in action. Army Commendation Medal with V device for valor. This man is a legitimate American hero." Patterson was trapped. He was surrounded by 6 Navy SEALs, facing a crowd of increasingly angry travelers, and dealing with a veteran whose service record was being verified in real time. The situation was spiraling completely out of his control. But Marcus Johnson wasn't finished. As a Black SEAL, he'd faced his own share of skepticism and discrimination, and he understood the unique challenges that David faced. "Sir, I need to ask you something," Johnson said to Patterson. "If this man had been white, would you have questioned his ID?" Patterson's face flushed red. This isn't about race, isn't it?" Johnson pressed. "Because I've been through this security checkpoint dozens of times, and I've never seen you question a white veteran's ID. But here's a black veteran, and suddenly you're an expert on fake military IDs." The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Everyone in the terminal could see exactly what was happening. A black veteran was being discriminated against by a security guard who had never served his country. David Kim, who had been quietly observing the confrontation, stepped forward. "Sir, I'm Korean American. I've been a SEAL for 8 years, and I've never had my military ID questioned, but I've watched black service members get questioned all the time. Why do you think that is?" Patterson was completely out of his depth. He'd expected to humiliate one man and move on with his day. Instead, he was facing 6 of America's most elite warriors, a growing crowd of angry travelers, and multiple cameras recording his every word. That's when everything changed. A woman in the crowd called out, "I know who that is." She was pointing at David, her voice carrying across the terminal. "That's Master Sergeant David Williams. He was on the news last year. He saved his entire unit in Afghanistan." The crowd began to murmur as people pulled out their phones and started searching for news stories about David's heroism. Within minutes, articles and videos were being shared, showing David receiving his medals, interviews with the soldiers whose lives he'd saved, and documentation of his service record. Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Well, that settles it. This man is a verified American hero. What he's not is someone who deserves to be humiliated by a security guard with a power complex." But the SEALs weren't done yet. They had a lesson to teach, not just to Patterson, but to everyone watching. Chief Rodriguez reached into his wallet and pulled out a small card. "Master Sergeant Williams, this is my personal contact information. If you ever face this kind of disrespect again, you call me. The SEAL community takes care of its own, and that includes all veterans who've served with honor." One by one, the other SEALs offered their own contact information to David. Marcus Johnson, James Wilson, David Kim, Michael Thompson, and Robert Davis, each of them made it clear that David had their support and the support of the entire Special Operations community. "You're not alone in this," Johnson told David. "What happened here today is unacceptable, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again." James Wilson held up his phone, which had been recording the entire confrontation. "This video is going to be seen by millions of people. Everyone is going to know how a TSA supervisor treated a Purple Heart recipient." Patterson realized that his career was probably over. The video would go viral, the TSA would launch an investigation, and he would become the face of everything wrong with how veterans were treated in America. But the SEALs weren't finished with their lesson. Rodriguez turned to address the crowd that had gathered around the checkpoint. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Master Sergeant David Williams. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne Division. He lost his leg saving 6 American lives. He earned a Purple Heart, 2 Bronze Stars, and the respect of every person who's ever served with him." The crowd erupted in applause. People were cheering, some were crying, and everyone was looking at David with the respect and admiration he deserved. "This man is an American hero," Rodriguez continued, "and he should never have to prove that to anyone, especially not to someone who's never served their country." David felt tears welling up in his eyes. For the first time since his injury, he felt like people saw him for who he really was, not as a disabled veteran, not as a black man who might be lying about his service, but as a hero who had sacrificed everything for his country. Thompson stepped forward with his own phone. "Master Sergeant, would you be willing to take a photo with us? We'd like to post it on our social media accounts to show the world what real military brotherhood looks like." David nodded, unable to speak. The 6 SEALs arranged themselves around him, and several passengers volunteered to take pictures. The images would later go viral, showing 6 of America's most elite warriors standing with a wounded veteran demonstrating the bonds that connected all who had served. But Patterson's ordeal wasn't over. Wilson approached him with his phone still recording. "Sir, I want to give you a chance to apologize to Master Sergeant Williams. The whole world is going to see this video. And right now, you don't look very good." Patterson looked around at the crowd, at the cameras, at the 6 SEALs who had completely dismantled his authority. He realized that his only chance at salvaging any dignity was to admit his mistake. I apologize," Patterson said quietly. "I was wrong to question your service. You're clearly a hero, and you deserve better treatment." David looked at the man who had humiliated him just minutes earlier. A part of him wanted to let Patterson twist in the wind, to let him face the consequences of his actions without any mercy. But that wasn't who David was. He was a soldier, and soldiers understood forgiveness. "Apology accepted," David said simply. "But I hope you've learned something today. When a veteran shows you their military ID, they're not just showing you a piece of plastic. They're showing you a piece of their soul." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "That's the difference between a real warrior and someone who just plays one on TV. Real warriors have honor even when they're being disrespected." As the crowd began to disperse, the SEALs made sure David was taken care of. They helped him through the priority security line, made sure he had everything he needed for his flight, and exchanged contact information so they could stay in touch. "Brother, you've got family in the special operations community," Rodriguez told him. "We take care of our own, and that includes all veterans who've served with honor." The video of the confrontation would be viewed over 10 million times in the first week alone. It sparked nationwide conversations about the treatment of veterans, particularly veterans of color, and led to policy changes at TSA checkpoints across the country. Patterson was suspended pending investigation and ultimately fired from his position. The TSA issued a formal apology to David and implemented new training programs to prevent similar incidents. But the real impact of that day went far beyond policy changes or personnel decisions. It was about the power of military brotherhood, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the recognition that heroes come in all colors. David made his flight to Memphis, where he was greeted by his daughter and hundreds of supporters who had seen the video. His daughter's graduation was everything he had hoped it would be, made even more special by the knowledge that millions of people now knew the truth about his service. The 6 SEALs returned to their families and their missions, but they stayed in touch with David. They had gained a new brother that day, and they had reminded the world that military service transcends race, politics, and personal prejudice. Months later, David would receive a letter from the Secretary of Defense, thanking him for his service and apologizing for the treatment he had received. He would be invited to speak at military events, sharing his story and inspiring other veterans to stand up for their rights. But perhaps most importantly, he would never again face skepticism about his service. The video had made him famous, and his story had become a symbol of the courage and sacrifice of all veterans. The 6 Navy SEALs had taught the world a valuable lesson that day. When good people witness injustice, they have a responsibility to act. They had shown that military brotherhood transcends rank, branch of service, and race. And they had reminded everyone that heroes are defined not by their appearance, but by their actions. David Williams had saved 6 lives on a battlefield in Afghanistan. But on that day at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, 6 Navy SEALs had saved something equally important: his dignity, his honor, and his faith in the brotherhood of those who serve. The confrontation lasted less than 30 minutes, but its impact would be felt for years to come. It was a reminder that respect must be earned, that service should be honored, and that sometimes it takes warriors to defend warriors. In the end, justice was served not by courts or committees, but by 6 men who understood that military service is a sacred trust, and that trust must be protected at all costs. They had witnessed an injustice, and they had acted to correct it. In doing so, they had honored not just David Williams, but every veteran who had ever faced discrimination or disrespect. The airport returned to its normal rhythm, but the lesson of that day would echo through the military community for years to come. 6 Navy SEALs had shown the world what military brotherhood really meant, and in doing so, they had reminded everyone that heroes stand together, no matter